All right. Hey guys, happy Thursday. Here is what we're talking about today, percent bar graphs. All right, so here's our objective. Today I will learn how to interpret and create percent bar graphs so that I can apply percent bar graphs to real world scenarios. I will know that I have it if I can fluently interpret and create percent bar graphs. So, how to interpret a percent bar graph? A percent bar graph shows the relative frequency of a data set, represented as a percent in a stacked bar graph or a more traditional bar graph. Okay? We're going to call this the traditional bar graph. Okay? So we have our title, retired employees. Over here it says percentage. Okay, it's important to know that anytime we're talking about percentages, okay, it should always add up to 100%. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what percent is category 1, what percent is category 2, what percent is category 3, what percent is category 4, and add them all up and see if they equal 100. Before we do that, let's take a look. All right, we have 0. We skip a line, 10, skip a line, 20, skip a line, 30. So that means if I don't skip a line, I'm counting by 5. So I have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, and 60. Okay, so each line I can see is worth 5. So now, let's see, category 1 goes right here, and that's 45. So I can write category 1 is 45%. Category 2, right here. So I can see that's 15%. Category 3, right there. I can see that's 30%. And category 4, right here. I can see that is 10%. Alright, so if this bar graph is graphed correctly, these numbers will add up to 100. So get out your calculator and add 45 plus 15 plus 30 plus 10. Tell me what you get. All right, you can hit pause if you need longer, but these numbers do add up to 100. Okay, so this bar graph is correct. Now, this is still a percent bar graph, okay, but it looks a little different, okay? You'll see the key here. We have breakfast, lunch, and supper, okay? Supper is what my grandpa used to call it. Maybe your family calls it supper, but maybe your family calls this dinner. So breakfast, lunch, and supper or dinner, okay? So we can see breakfast is the dark one. So I can see from 0 to 30% is breakfast, okay? From 0 to 30% is breakfast. So I'm just going to draw that line. I can see it's 30%, okay? So breakfast is going to be 30%. Now here's where it gets tricky. Lunch, I can see is from 30 to 40%, okay? So you might want to think, oh, 40% of people, their favorite meal is lunch. However, that's not the case because it did not start at 0. It started at the 30% and ended at the 40%. So we just need to figure out what is this little portion right here. And the way we're going to do that is subtract. We're going to subtract 40 where it ended minus 30 where it began. And that's going to give us 10. So I know that lunch, 10%. 10% of people's favorite meal was lunch. And supper or dinner. Okay, it starts at 40 and it ends at 100, okay? So this does not mean 100% of people's favorite meal is supper, right? It starts at 40 and ends at 100. So we've got to figure out what is the difference between 100 and 40. So we'll do 100 minus 40, and we get 60. So 60% of people surveyed, their favorite meal is supper. Okay, now all of these numbers, 60%, 10%, and 30%, should all add up to 100, right? Because in total, there's 100%. So let's add 60 plus 10 plus 30. And that equals 100%. All right. So here we have a question. This is going to be something similar that you might see on the STAR test. Okay, so let's take what we just learned about percent bar graphs and let's see how we could use this information to help us answer a question. Hector surveyed all the 6th graders at his school about their favorite after-school activity. The table shows the results that were used to make a bar graph. Okay, so here's the activity, here's the number of students. Reading, 44 students, this was their favorite activity. Sports, 55 students prefer sports as their favorite activity. Video games, 55 students like video games as their favorite activity. And music, 66 students listen to music as their favorite activity. The question is, which percentage bar graph best represents the data? I'm going to give you a second to think about how you might solve this problem. All right, let's see if your strategy is correct. I'm going to teach you a strategy using a frequency table, okay? A frequency table is a chart that shows the number of times a data value occurs. Relative frequency is the number of times a data value occurs divided by the total number of data values, usually expressed as a percent. A relative frequency table is a chart that shows relative frequency. Okay, so for reading, the frequency is 44. Okay, how many kids prefer reading as their favorite activity? 44. So that's the frequency. What is the fraction? Okay, 44 over 220. Where did we get this number? We added 44 plus 55 plus 55 plus 66. Okay, we added all these numbers together to get our total. Our total is 220. Okay, so that goes on bottom. Our part, okay, is 44. So that goes on top. Who remembers, how do you turn a fraction into a decimal? We divide, right? The numerator divided by the denominator. 44 divided by 220 gets you the decimal 0.2. How do we turn a decimal into a percent? we move the decimal place 2 spots to the right, take away the decimal, and add the percent sign. So let's do sports. What is our frequency on sports? How many students like sports? Well, right here it says 55. So our frequency is 55. What's my fraction? Okay, our numerator is going to be 55. That's the part that we're looking at. We're looking at how many kids' favorite activity is sports, so that's going on top. Underneath, our denominator is going to be the whole. Okay, we said there's 220 altogether, so that's our fraction, 55 over 220. How do we turn that into a decimal? We divide, right? So we're going to do 55, divided by 220, and that equals should have gotten 0.25. Okay, so our decimal is 0.25. If our decimal is 0.25, how can you turn that into a percent? We're going to move our decimal 2 places to the right. So here's 1, here's 2. We're going to take away our decimal, add a percent sign, and it becomes 25%. Next, video games. What is our frequency for video games? It's 55, right? Look up here, right here, video games, 55 students. So let's write 55. Now, since this is the exact same number of students who liked sports, I know I can just copy all of this. So my fraction will be my part, 55, over my whole, but the total is 220. When I do 55 divided by 220, I get 0.25. And the way to turn that into a percent, move it 2 places to the right, and now I have 25%. And music. All right, what is my frequency for music? Well, it says 66 kids like music, so my frequency is 66. What's my fraction? It's going to be 66 over 220. How do I turn that into a decimal? Going to divide, right? 66, our part, our numerator, divided by our denominator, 220. That equals 0.3. So our decimal is 0.3. How do I turn that into a percent? Let's move our decimal 2 places to the right. 1, 2. Add your percent sign. What goes right here? We're missing a number. There's no number. What can I put right here? We can put a 0. Okay, when we're missing a number, we add a 0. So now it becomes 30%. So now we've done our frequency chart. Okay, so we're looking at our percents because it says which percentage bar graph best represents the data. So now I need to look at the percent. Okay, which one of these bar graphs has reading at 20%, sports at 25%, video games at 25%, and music at 30%. I'll give you a second. If you need longer, go ahead and pause the video.